Hey everybody, welcome to another fun and exciting episode of The Quick Draw. I'm your host, Mike, with my co-host, John. We're probably going to be talking about something that maybe I'm not the most qualified to talk for. Civility.
Half?
Well, I mean, anybody who's followed me probably knows that I like to, shake things up a little bit. So to keep me in check and to make sure I'm not a total ass tonight as we talk about the death of civility, she was actually voted in second grade. She was Miss Cordiality. No, Congeniality. Is it Cordiality?
I was I can't remember. No, I was the Courtesy Queen.
Oh, Courtesy Queen.
Grade.
That's right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She's also a marketing and communications expert and honestly one of the nicest people on Twitter. So if you're not following her, at ELBH. Elaine, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm really excited to be here. And I have to tell you, you're not a total ass, but you do half-ass the incivility sometimes.
I think half-ass is how they would describe this show, actually. I'm going to beat you to that punch, Derek.
Wait. Oh, I think I know which one we're talking about. But anyway.
So the left has been kind of having a little snit fist about civility. And, what I think was funny about it is the talk from the left about, well, this is the last straw. We've been so nice to you guys. Now, no more. We're just going to stop being nice. And I'm just like, is that before or after the bike locks?
Right. Yeah. Not to mention, was it Michael Moore, I think, was on, I forget what show he was on recently. It might have been Bill Maher, which would have been hilarious. But he said that, that leftists are always so, they're so nice. They just give in all the time. They don't fight. They're just weak. Well, I was like, really? Which ones have you been watching?
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that if you can call probably the squeakiest clean politician that we have had in our country in maybe centuries, I don't know, Mitt Romney, all the dirty, awful names that were called him during the last election, we're pretty much going to ignore what you say about civility, because you can't defame people on things that aren't true and then expect us to take you seriously when you do come back and say that we're not being civil. And I that's been such a frustrating thing for me to watch, because now we have a guy who is a little uncivil.
Yeah.
And as a communications person, it just rubs me the wrong way and creeps me out. But it is effective because it is mirroring exactly what has been thrown at us for a lot of years. And I do want to say, this isn't all liberals. It is the noisy press, focused, or the ones that we see the most of are those people. And they are as incivil to us as anybody I've ever seen. All my liberal friends cringe. So why are you doing this to our country? Why are you doing what you hate back to us now? And I actually get downright angry about it, because it's not right and it's ripping us apart. I mean,
I gotta say, it's kind of funny, Elaine, that you just sound so nice as you say you're getting angry. I'm just so tickled angry. Fierce, guys. This is just not very nice.
Sorry, it reminded me of Fix It Felix from Wreck-It Ralph.
I know.
But I mean, here's the thing.
Born placid, so I'm very placid, kind, and yet I get so mad about things that my mom face comes out occasionally, and it's scary. It's scary.
But here's the thing, like, civility to the left, I think we can all agree, civility to the left means, shut up and do what we tell you to, right? That's really what they mean when they say civility, because they'll take anything that anyone on the right believes, it could, whether it's, reduction of government, border enforcement, social norms and traditions, that sort of thing, and they'll say, well, that's uncivilized, that's uncivil.
Right.
Well, I have an opinion. I'm allowed to have an opinion, right? Like,
Well,
Like,
according
how
to
is
them, no.
well, and the question is when do you draw the line? Because I look at civility as kind of a means to an end, right? Like, you know, you mentioned you're in marketing and communications.
Yep.
I've been in sales before. You know, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
Absolutely.
That's the whole point, right?
Right.
That's the soft sell, right?
Right.
And if you can't convince the person with the soft sell, then you go with the hard sell.
But that's really what turned me around on. I love this whole walk away movement right now that's kind of going on Sub Rosa on Twitter, because that was me coming out of college. You know, I totally and completely believed that liberals were kinder and more concerned about making sure people had what they needed, et cetera, et cetera. And as I got out, in fact, I'll tell you a story. I got out of college in 1988, and in my area, there were absolutely no jobs anywhere. And so I had to get a job in a town, Pendleton, Oregon, 50 miles away from where I live. And I drove over there every day and back.
Wow, it's a long way.
For $5 an hour. Okay.
Damn.
And yeah. and I had to pay Oregon state income taxes. Even though I live in Washington state, we don't have income taxes. So I paid Washington state sales taxes, Oregon state income taxes, and made $5 an hour and drove 50 miles each way. And I'm just trying to be a good citizen. And here I am, this little college educated girl that thinks she knows everything about everything in the world. And one day I'm out, and this guy named Slim, not kidding, his nickname was Slim. And he's trying to show me how to put irrigation pipes together. And he's talking it through. And me thinking I know everything about it in the world says, well, how come you don't do it this way? And I'll never forget, because he had an empty can of soda, and he spit into the can because they all chewed. And he looks at me and he goes, you know, for one of them college educated girls, you sure don't know shit. And that is the best education I ever got, because it taught me to shut the hell up and listen to other people, even if we don't talk the same language. And what's happening right now between the right and the left is we're not listening to each other. We're not caring that everybody has something to bring to the table. And what I realized at that moment was that I was a leftist, and I thought I knew what was best for Slim. And I didn't. And not only did I not know what was best for Slim, but what I thought was best for Slim was the stupidest thing in the world. And so, you know, all of my college education ended up going down into that one moment where the lights came on. And I realized that people need to have an opportunity to speak for themselves, no matter what my bigotry is. And I'm a socioeconomic bigot and an educational bigot because
you elitist.
My background. I know, isn't it nice? But it ticks me off because I almost missed out on what was probably one of the best experiences of my entire life, because I thought I had the answers for everyone. And that's the difference between the left and the right. The left believes they have what's best for everyone based on money. And the right believes that everyone has an opportunity and the agency to be left alone.
Right.
And,
now, Elaine, your comments actually sparked an interesting comment. I want to see what your response to that is. Mm-hmm. So we have Christopher Toole saying, well, let's be honest, not everyone has something to bring to the table. So what would you say to that approach?
I would say that's not true. Everyone has something to bring to the table, even if it's teaching us compassion. That's it. Okay. Sometimes somebody who brings something to the table,
patience,
humility, humility. I mean, I work now with parents who come in with their kids, and I'm getting really close to get off my lawn age. And I've already raised my kids, and I know that none of us know how to raise kids, right? We think we do, and then we have another one and realize we don't know anything, and we just kind of hope that they stay alive and are loved, for their whole lives. But at the end of the day, when you get down to talking to people, you have to go, okay, this is what they truly believe at this moment. And I can accept that that's a deeply held belief, even though it is stupid. It will get them in trouble, but they have to learn that themselves.
Right. And that's the live and let live thing, you know. It's
exactly. So I can't teach people the things that will help them necessarily. I mean, I can tell them, but they're not going to listen.
Well, and I love that. Well, plus you have some investment in your children, so your children is very different from other adults around the, you know, elsewhere. And I think that's really it, is because someone asked me that years ago, and it had more to do with, you know, again, you can't have my skin color and my politics at the same time and expect any kind of civility given your way. But
yeah,
the thing
I'm
is
sorry.
Because you know, many people still ask me, well, why aren't you a Democrat? Why aren't you on the left? Just shouldn't you be? Because everyone else is racist. And I was like, well, for starters, because I like being treated like an adult, not some helpless child. And that's exactly what the left does, is to them, their anger with me is, why won't you come to me? Why won't you? And I think that's what you just said, is that I think their basic feeling is, you don't understand the vagaries of life. We do. You need to understand that we know best for you. You know, and I think that's why they believe that what they're saying is compassionate. To them, that's compassion. Because...
Right, and that is what has helped me be more civil, is to realize that they believe they're compassionate. Because I did. I thought, oh, I'm the nicest person. You know, I thought I deserved that you know, courtesy queen. I don't. I have, you know, I mean, people like everybody else, you know, but.
I like to put it this way. I've always said, like, everyone is a perfect example. Some people are perfect examples of what to do, and other people are perfect examples of what not to do.
Right. Exactly.
So you're talking about people's opinions. I really like what you said, because I think that kind of humility is what we're lacking in our political discourse. It absolutely is I know better than you. You're going to listen to me, and if you disagree with me even the slightest bit, fuck you. That's the attitude. And I get, you know, we got some, you know, people are saying examples like racist, abortion apologists. So it says, yeah, okay, those are perfect examples of what not to do, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, it's, you know, I was a missionary for 2 years, right?
Right. Where did you do your mission, by the way?
I was in South America. I lived in Chile for 2 years, right? And you learn really quick that going around and knocking on people's doors and telling them, hey, your church is false, come join my church, doesn't work. You know, you kind of gotta, you have to reach. Now, some people, you know, you can't reach, or some people, the amount of time and energy you have to dedicate to actually reach them, you know, compared to the other people out there that, you know, are just ready to hear what you have to say. You know, you got to make good use of your time. You got to make good use. You know, I always liken our political efforts, you know, our activist efforts, what John and I do, to kind of like missionary work. Like, you kind of have to evangelize conservatism. And I don't mean you get out there and Bible thump. What I mean is, the first thing you have to do is you have to build a relationship of trust. You have to get people to want to listen to you, respect you. Now, some people are never going to respect you, no matter what you do, because they are convinced that your politics or your beliefs are invalid. And this is something that I've said for many, many years, is that progressives the left have this fundamental core belief. They don't say it, but it's evident in everything they say and they do.
Which is that there are two. Realize it.
I think they do, because I've said it often on Twitter and elsewhere, and I've never had a progressive come to me and say, yeah, I don't believe that. But it's I believe it is their fundamental core belief that they believe there are two classes of people: those fit to rule and those fit to be ruled.
Yeah.
And if you do not accept every iota of their political doctrine, they will. Then you are in that latter class. You are only fit to be ruled. You do not deserve autonomy. You do not deserve agency. You do not deserve the right to self-governance. You need somebody better than you to run the show.
You know what's interesting? I've worked in, because I'm around education a lot, and I've worked in an area where there are pockets of very strident liberals. What's really interesting about the liberal mindset is there is never a doubt that they would be part of that ruling class. And they treat their colleagues like that.
Right.
They treat, you know, their bosses like that. I've gotten good over the years of almost immediately picking out the liberals in any situation by the way they treat their peers, their colleagues, their bosses, everything, because of that one core belief in themselves. I am so much smarter than everyone else here.
My shit doesn't stink.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think that people who have more liberal or more conservative beliefs in the broad middle believe that. You know, I think there's this huge middle where people aren't strident. They're just kind of like, whatever, am I doing okay? You know, how much do I have to pay to the government? You know, is my mortgage being paid? Okay, I think that's most of us, but we're kind of talking about the activist fringes. And it's a mindset that's really interesting. I had a Black colleague who was a young lady during the first Obama campaign. And there wasn't a single conservative in that place that was allowed to speak. I mean, we were all just dead silent and didn't say a thing. And finally, this young lady said to me, "Hey, do you feel like taking a break and going for a walk?" And I said, "Sure." And so we go outside, we go for a walk during our break. And she goes, "I have a ton of family in the military and I'm a conservative and I can barely stand this." And I thought, what a racist bunch of jerks that you just are assuming that because, you know, she has a certain skin color that she has an idea saying. So
because and that's exactly correct. It's that, and I think the mindset is basically that it's also between the idea of being collectivist versus individualist.
Yes.
If you've ever watched like Sargon of Akkad, he constantly points this out. And I think what it is the idea that for leftists, and like I said, I don't know that all of them necessarily even see it as a bad thing. But what they do is, if they look at me, they don't look at me as me, John, an individual. Right. They look at me as faceless member of Black category, Black male, straight category number, whatever, and that you should, here are your preset things that you should think. And if you don't, then you are now completely exempt to the rules of any kind of civility. And we will throw, because again, every racial slur that you can imagine, I've had thrown at me, not by conservatives, the people they claim are racist, but by leftists who claim that they are not, they are the least racist people on earth. Yet, they're the ones I hear racial slurs from all the time. because how dare you not fit the box that we have for you? This is your pen. You're supposed to stay in it. Stop climbing out. Stay here. You know. And I get, and you know, why would I want to do that?
And you know, the thing that was funny about these, and they were kids. They, you know, I kept thinking, well, maybe some of them will figure this out eventually. I doubt it. But what I kept thinking to myself was, what got you to the point where you believe you know what's best for everybody, and then had the gall, the unmitigated arrogance to tell that to everyone. I mean, that's just, it's beyond me, because it is not a form of thinking that I can even imagine.
Well,
I mean, I can barely run my own life. I cannot run everyone else's.
And to be honest, I believe that leftist thinking, and this goes all the way back to the progressive era, where progressives were actually quite honest about what they believe. And that, you know, I read a lot about the things that they said. Today, they try to claim that, no, we're not like this, but they always have been. So what it is that I believe leftist ideology naturally draws narcissists. So that's why a lot of leftists tend to be narcissistic. They can't believe, even when they say, have you ever seen that video? What's his name? Avi, I always forget his last name. The guy, he's from Fox News, and he did a man on the street video about voter ID.
Oh, yeah.
And look at the things that many of the leftists said. I don't believe any one of them. If you said, don't you think that's kind of bigoted, they'd look at you like, why would it be? I don't believe for a second that they think that, because they're so sure that racist means not me, that whatever they say, whatever they do, can't be racist. It can't be because I'm the good guy, you know.
Well, and I think there is a self-responsibility piece to this, where my problem, and this is why, another reason why I'm a conservative, and I think is misunderstood by the left. There are some people that want to put their Christian ideals or whatever it is over on other people. But most of us want the opportunity to just live the way we want to live. And what happens is that becomes a conviction to other people. And,
right.
You know, I think that creates a certain amount of cognitive dissonance for people who are like, well, how can you be so happy? You've been married for 30 years to the same man, and you would rather
right.
work at home than, you know, at work. And you loved being pregnant, you know, what's wrong with you? But, you know, I don't care if other people do that. I don't, you know, but I take responsibility for my choices because I don't want to see that to other people. I mean, that means that I have to give up some things. Okay.
Right.
You know,
and you bring up an interesting point, Elaine. Because there's something to be said that when unhappy people are unhappy, they've got to make everybody else miserable like themselves. Yeah. And I think that's another thing. You know, John mentioned that it appeals to narcissists. Yeah, maybe. You know, I think narcissists will gravitate towards any ideology that they can use towards their own ends. But I definitely think progressivism appeals to miserable people who, for whatever reason, like being miserable. They become so accustomed to their misery, or they're not willing to do the things that they become so accustomed to their misery. They're not willing. Right? It's become a part of their identity. They're not willing to give that up and to do the things that would actually make them happy.
Right.
Because the term progressive, right? You know, you can have progressives on the left and right. If by left and right you're not talking about like totalitarianism versus anarchy.
Right.
If you're talking about like fascism versus Nazi in the old European model, you can have progressives in the Republican Party. And those are like the people you talked about, the people that have, you know, their religious values that they have to shoehorn and shove down everyone's throat, right?
Right.
But then you also have, but in the early 1900s, those progressives, those same religious progressives, they were Democrats, right? So exactly. They'll pick a side that suits their agenda.
That gets into the whole tribalism thing that we're dealing right now. I mean, Trump is not a conservative in the same way I'm conservative.
No,
he does conservative. He does.
I don't think he's conservative at all.
No, I don't.
He does some conservative things.
That's the thing right there. He does conservative things occasionally, but he's not.
Right. But he's not a conservative in the principled sense or anything like that. He is a guy who had an opportunity and took it. And
possibly,
you know, he's such a unique case, because I honestly believe that Hillary could not have lost to anybody else, and that he could not have lost to anybody but Hillary. I mean, he could not have won anybody but Hillary. I think they were a unique combination in American history that is not ever going to come again.
I agree.
And
I will.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that one thing I will defend is the idea that I think the reason why leftism draws narcissists is because there is a fundamental difference between the left and the right, in that the right does generally, principally, now that doesn't mean every person on the right follows those principles, but principally it's a thing that says individuals mean more than some idea of a collective, and therefore you have to live and let live. You have to let people, even if you don't like what they say or do. I mean, that's the essence of the Constitution, the thinking behind it is the idea that, you know, like, what was it, Jefferson, I think it was, who said, you know, that whether a person believes in no God or many gods, it neither breaks my leg nor picks my pocket, you know. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. But on the left, the general philosophy is that the collective matters, you know, more than the individual. That you and also that, as Mike said, there's a set of people that are more enlightened than the rest who should be telling the other ones how to live, and therefore the scramble is to be in that group. And since the left, I think, conceives of it, so now that's attractive to someone who's a narcissist. I don't think that the idea that you don't have anything to say about someone else's life, that's not attractive to narcissists. You know,
I would say selfishness, maybe even more than narcissist, because it is this selfishness that says, you know, because a narcissist, I always think of that as mean an actual whole psychological diagnosis. But I think that selfishness and that emphasis on self, I would agree with you, because that says, A, I'm not responsible for my own behavior. It happened to me. And I'm the victim. And that's a huge thing in our culture to get day on both the left and the right is who gets to have the greatest victim status, because victim status allows you to be holy in our society today. If I am a victim of something, I am automatically holy and cannot be questioned. And that's very different than what I grew up with.
And I think you touch on something, Elaine, the kind of with that selfishness, there's a lack of self-awareness, right?
Yes. Oh,
like you have to, if you want to do better, if you know, for example, if you mentioned victims, if you want to get out of that victim status, there's a certain degree of self-awareness. Now, and this isn't victim blaming, by the way. I know the leftists and liberals are going to be like, you're blaming the victim. No, I'm fucking not. Calm your fucking tits. All right. It's
true story.
What it is at some point you have to reflect and say, okay, what did I do to put myself in the situation that I can control, that I can do differently so that this doesn't happen again, or so that's less likely to happen again, right? That's not saying it's your fault that something bad happened to you.
But it's saying, your responsibility.
But it's your responsibility to say, okay, you know, I could have done this differently and maybe things would have turned out differently, right? It's still not my fault. I'm still a victim. You know, I'll give you a really funny example. When I was in college, I had this asshole roommate. No, he really was. I'm not shifting. I'm not projecting here. I promise. So he was really antisocial, really weird, and you know, I had another roommate who was really cool. He was from China. We got along really great, but he didn't know how to load a dishwasher. So he would overload it. So I would unload it so that it would load properly.
Have you been talking to my husband?
Right.
So I overload the dishwasher all the time. So
I would put the extra dishes in the sink so that when the initial load was done, I'd film. And this guy would get all butthurt about it, and he'd put the dirty dishes from the sink into people's cupboards. And he would usually do mine because he would just assume that since I took the dishes out and put them in the sink, they were mine. I'm like, no. So, and I got fed up. At one point, I got fed up. And I didn't know he was in the apartment, and I just start cussing him out to my Chinese roommate friend, and I'm just like, this asshole, I'm gonna kick his ass. I'm fucking pissed off at this guy. I'm just grumbling. Like, I'm not actually threatening the guy. I'm just like, you know, well, he gets mad, comes out, starts threatening me, right? Starts telling me you're gonna do it the way things I tell you, and then he's like putting his hands behind his head and trying to flex his muscles and make me all intimidated. He was a little bigger than me. He was fat, but he was bigger than me. And, you know, and I mouth off to him, and he's like, no, you're going to do it my way or else. And then he storms off. Now, I could have let him walk away, right? Instead, I said, you know what? You go ahead and try that, and I'll kick your ass. He turns around and punches me in the face. And then a fight ensued, and you know, I win. I won. Just for the record, I won. But you know, I look back and he attacked me, right? And then he tried to get me kicked out of BYU. He did all these things to like try to ruin my life, which he ended up over dirty dishes. Right. So like I said, this guy was an asshole. Now, I look back at that. I could blame him. I could say that guy was a total asshole. That never should have happened to me. I'm the victim here. Da 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 da. Right. But if I'm being honest, like, okay, let's look back at that. I could have not escalated it. Yeah. I could not have told him I was going to kick his ass. I could have just, you know, let him walk away. I didn't. That's on me. I mouthed off. Like, I'd probably do the same thing again in a heartbeat. But the point is I acknowledge, hey, that's my fault a little bit. Like, I contributed to that.
Right. So here's my question. You enjoyed it a little bit too, didn't you?
Right.
Oh, I absolutely did. Absolutely. Especially when I kicked his ass.
There we go. That is
especially when I kicked his ass and got him kicked out of BYU because after he tried to get me kicked out. So I got him expelled because he's a lying.
And so you're just sitting there thinking, okay, I am all that because I kicked his ass, blah, 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 blah. But it was sport. And that is what is weird about our politics right now, is that it's not about deeply held beliefs. It's about sport. We enjoy bitching at each other because we are so privileged as a society.
And I might add, I'll bring him up because I've argued with him before, but this is my one problem with Kurt Schlichter. Okay, that's the one problem I have with him, because he's the kind of guy who says, well, you're over there, you know, mowing about your principles, you're losing, because for him it's a war, and I get why he thinks that, you know.
Right.
It's a war.
Right. Oh, I get it too.
I get it, because one thing I share with him is, and I'm sorry if anybody doesn't like it, but I have a total and complete contempt for leftism. Not for leftists. I take them on a case by case. I take each person on a case by case basis. But the ideology, I hate it, I despise it, and I wish it would die. But the thing is that, you know, but I also say, if you're gonna fight it, don't become it in order to fight it. And this is the only thing, like I said, because other than this one issue, me and Kurt Schlichter are totally in agreement. You know, he shows contempt for the left, and I'm like, I'm there with you. But I don't want to become them to fight them. Because
and that's my problem with Trump, honestly, is because he is them.
Right.
He's not even becoming them. He is them.
Right.
And you know, he is just doing exactly the same thing. Whether or not that is necessary at this time, and in a second I wanted to let you talk, but Mike, but in a second, I do have a theory on that and why it's so uncivil right at this time. And I don't know if it's right. But anyway, what were you going to say, Mike?
Well, I was going to say, I like that I'm glad you called me out there about liking winning. No, because here's the thing. You're right. There is, and the left does this too, right? When they call us Nazis, when they call us fascists, right? I'll admit, I like getting into political fight. I like the fight. I like the political fight. I like winning. And it's easy for me to do that because in my mind, and John touches on that when he talks about his contempt for leftism, right? We're fighting people that to us deserve to lose.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think
and that's why the left has to make us Nazis. They have to make us fascists because theirs is a very low threshold of what they're morally superior to. So they have to pick the lowest common denominator.
Right. In order to have moral superiority, you have to. And without morals, and the only way you can.
But to your point about Trump, I think a lot of people that voted for him like him because for 8 years. They not only didn't feel that. They didn't feel like they were winning. They didn't get that little boost to their ego. They were getting kicked in the teeth, right? Which is what makes it so ridiculous when the left talks about, you know, how civil they were or how no more Mr. Nice Guy. It's like, really? There was a nice guy in this scenario? Like, when was the nice guy? Like, for the last 8 years? Because I didn't see it when, we were being called bitter clingers and when we were having the IRS sicked on us. I didn't see it in the 60s and 70s when leftist, extremists were bombing the shit out of people. I didn't see it in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s when progressives were shutting down businesses that are putting people in jail that didn't agree with them or toe the line. So where is this? Or engaging in eugenics or experimentation on black people. So where is this civility? Where is this Mr. Nice Guy? That's what I want to know. But it's specifically the last 8 years, people got kicked in the teeth repeatedly over and over and over and over again.
Well, here's my theory on it. My husband he works for the state of Washington, ironically, and it's interesting to be conservative and part of a labor union. Anyway, subject for another day. But he had to go to a training called Bridges Out of Poverty, which was hilarious because the state paid for him to stay in the nicest hotel and have a 21 butt breakfast before they went to Bridges of, poverty.
We're in the wrong line of work, John.
Yeah, no kidding. Anyway, hallelujah. But anyway, the thing that they did bring up that I think was, and by the way, there were no bridges in this seminar. It was just explaining the problem, which we all know. But one of the things they talked about is that the lower classes, so the underclasses and the poverty classes in the country, by the time a child is 3 years old, he has heard something like 11 million words, not individual unique words, but 11 million total. And in the same period of time for a middle class child, that child hears close to 30,000 or 30 million words. Okay, so the language for the lower class is very different than the language for the middle class and the language for the upper class. So for instance, to use this in a specific way, if a kid is climbing on the back of the couch, and you're going to laugh at me saying this out loud, but the dad's going to look at the kid and say, get the fuck off the couch, you little bastard. Okay? That's what, did it sound nice?
My poor Mormon virgin ears.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's what it is.
That's what the lower class is going to say. I can't even say it without blushing a little.
I believe that.
It's true. So then what the middle class father is going to say is, get down off the couch right now. Do you remember what happened to you last time you were doing that and you fell down and broke your arm? Okay, so that's where that extra language comes. So what happened with the Obama administration is, in order for a Black candidate to sort of get out of the perceived level in the media, he had to use the language of the upper and high-end classes. So he had all this lofty language, and he said these terrible things, but they were all like packaged in beautiful dulcet tones, and all of this.
Elitist, I guess.
Yes, elitist. And so it sounded really nice to people in the upper middle class and the upper classes. They sounded so polished and wonderful. But the problem is that every other class in the country is like only connecting to the words that they understand, which are bitter clingers and you're idiots and those kinds of things. So along comes this guy like Trump, who talks like they do, and starts screaming like they do and fighting for them. And it's such a relief because it's not this puffy sort of cloaked insult. It's now somebody that's fighting for me and is willing to go to the floor for me. And I think that that's a really unique sort of thing that couldn't have happened outside of the last 8 years.
And I think that makes sense, because I felt that way too. And I suppose there's some irony for me, because I'm a person who's kind of known for polished speech. But
right.
On the other hand, I'm also, I guess, poor. I'm part of the, so I understand that sort of thinking. And I look at it and I think, okay, because again, initially, I also was very taken by Donald Trump, because I thought that, because when people say Republicans seem so spineless, they don't fight, they don't do anything, they just take it on the chin all the time, and this guy doesn't. I get why that's a relief. It was a relief to me. Even as I was saying, okay, but what is he actually saying? Is it useful? Is it meaningful? Does it help your cause? Even though I was saying that, I was still like, yeah, go hit the media. The media sucks, because they do. And they do. So he is the avatar of one's frustration. And I think that if you let yourself flow with that frustration, which a lot of people did, then you get President Trump, because they said, you know what, I'm frustrated. And also because it was down once it was out of the primaries. At that point, they were like, "Well, you have to vote for him because of it's that or Hillary." But even in the primaries, a lot of people were like, "No, we want this guy because unlike the other guys, you can be as principled as you want." And this is where I think the people who think like Schlichter won out. Is they said the principles are all great, but you keep losing even when you abide by the principles. So we want to win, even if it means we have to abandon them. We want to win. We want to feel like we're on top.
We're going to get at least 2 justices out of it. So,
at least.
you know, yeah. I want to.
It's just by the means, right?
I want to hang out with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I really, honestly do. But anyway.
But you know what's interesting? And John and I, we noticed this trend. Well, you know, I want to know what your thoughts are on this. We noticed the trend during the 2016 election. There was this sudden resurgence towards honesty. I'm just telling it like it is, right?
Yeah.
And I, honestly, I kind of feel like that is, you know, an issue where maybe the discussion on civility is kind of breaking down, because there's a difference between being honest and being a jackass, right? There's like I'm honest. I'll be brutally, or at least I try to be. I will be brutally honest with people when they need me to be. Right. But sometimes, and now, granted, you know, I'm biased. Like I will be more patient and tolerant and loving and patient with my friends and people I care about, right? Who disagree with me, than some random schmuck from the internet who just wants to pick a fight, right? But at the same, but as a general rule, yeah, I try to be honest while also being civil. But there was this massive trend in 2016, and Trump kind of kicked it off, right? But people who supported him picked him up on it. He's just like, I'm just telling it like it is. I just want to be honest. And I don't, you know, we mentioned the sport, right? I don't think that was it in this case. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a couple of things here, and I think it's very complicated, and I feel very fortunate to get to live in this era, because when I was young, I started reading very, very early. So I think I started reading about the time I was 4, 5-ish, and I started reading the newspaper every day. We didn't have television in my house, and so the newspaper was my link to the outside world. And the newspaper always, you know, there was a certain common, in our country, there was a certain common language for public consumption. You know, there's a way newspapers and magazines were written, and there was kind of this common culture. And when you went to school a little later, you'd all seen the same shows and all of that kind of stuff. And funny story here, Richard Nixon landed in our town when he was running the second time for president. And that would have been, 72? And I was just a little kid. The whole town turned out, so there were like 30,000 people out there. And I got almost up to the front, and this woman who was in her 50s shoved me out of the way just as Nixon was coming by. And Richard Nixon saw it, turned around and came back and shook my hand. And so when he was when he resigned, and through all of Watergate, as a child on the front row, I was just devastated, because this man who had been so kind to me in real life as a kid was now getting beat up in the press. And it was brutal. It was very brutal, very much like it is today. It's just that it was all in this common language. So as time has gone on, we've seen, I got on the internet in about, I think our first internet connection was like 93, 94, somewhere around in there. So we've been on the internet a really long time. And I joined Free Republic. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It was really big after the election. It's a conservative.
Not a fan, actually.
Yeah, it was a conservative kind of chat site. I think it may still be out there. I got kicked off. And
I can't imagine why. I was going to say, you're not. How could you be kicked off of anything?
I think because I expected them to be nicer to Rudy Giuliani of all things. But
how much of an asshole do you have to be to kick Elaine out?
That's what I was saying. I was like,
I don't know. Don't talk.
Now, John, we have a question for you. We have a question for you. A couple questions in the chat. How many times were you accused of talking white or told you speak so well? That's from Lloyd
that's a
Smats.
good question.
How much time do you have?
We've only got 13 minutes left of the show. And then Garth Haycock. John, were you ever accused of over-enunciating? I have a black friend from school who was well-spoken who was told that he over-enunciated to make up for being black.
Yeah. Okay. So funny or somewhat funny story about this. Okay, so when I went to high school, when I went to, because I did part of my high school at home, and then I went to a charter school here. But anyway, that's beside the point. So I was not very well versed in so-called Ebonics at the time. So
that was my problem too in high school.
When people would talk that way, I kind of just would gloss over it because I didn't really understand it. And so I just spoke the way I normally do. That's what I do. It's been my whole thing. It's for generations in my family. So this one guy, he was saying something. I don't know what it was, but he was going on about something, and I kind of was letting him know that I don't understand what you're saying. And he apparently took insult to it. So he ultimately he ended up like punching me in the face because he honestly, but at one point before that, he said something I thought was illuminating. He said, "You just talk the way you do to embarrass me in front of white people."
Interesting.
And I'm like,
that's funny because
I don't even know you.
That's funny because I was that guy. I was that kid in high school, and my high school was majority black. But I was that kid in high school. I needed that one black friend who could translate for me. Because I would talk to my other black friends who spoke nothing but Ebonics, and I would just be like, is he insulting? Is he insulting me? Is he like asking me a question? Like, I don't know what to say, guys. Help, please. And I would look at my friend, and he'd just be like, yeah, he means this. And I'd be like, oh, that. And then they would try to teach me.
Have you ever seen Airplane?
Yes. I know what you're talking about.
I speak jive.
I want to be her when I grow up. I like seriously.
That was so hilarious. No, I love that movie so much.
Coming no slack jive turkey.
and you know, and it is true, you know, that there is a undercurrent, you know, with among blacks. Actually, if you want a good like a really good show to watch that really actually chronicles a lot of problems inside of the so-called black community really well, I'd suggest watching Luke Cage. If you haven't watched
really? Okay.
the Netflix,
I love that series. Yes.
The second season gets it so right. It's so good.
Okay.
You know, the constant problems with the light-skinned blacks versus dark-skinned blacks. My mother went through that very thing where, you know, fortunately my grandfather was a smart guy where he's, you know, she always told me the story about how she came home one day and because again, my family, very dark people. And so my mom and her brother, they came home and they're like, they called us black. And my grandfather's like, you are. So, but, you know, yeah. But that's actually a common insult. A common insult among black people is to call someone black because of because when you're dark, you draw a lot of ire. And that just because one is black, when they're from different countries, there's a lot of ire there too. Again, my parents are a good example. My dad is very, very African, and my mom is Black American. And it was just like match meet powder keg. So, you know,
so Elaine, I have to tell you this story. I've told this story before on other episodes.
Oh yeah.
When I was in college, so I had a friend from New York who came to BYU, and he was like one of the few black kids at BYU, like one of 8. And we were getting to know each other. We were both new students. We were reminiscing about being from the East Coast because I'm from Florida and he's from New York, and Utah's very much a culture shock for us, even though we were raised Mormon.
Right.
And so we're telling each other's life stories, and he tells me, "Oh yeah, my dad is African black and my mom is Haitian," or the other way around. I can't remember the story now. And I just and everyone's listening to this conversation because, like I said, they've never met a black person before, and so they're listening in. They're eavesdropping on this conversation, and I'm like, huh, that's really interesting. I'm surprised they got along, and I meant that because if you've grown up in Florida, I grew up around Haitians, I grew up around African blacks. They did not get along.
No,
and all these white people from Utah are like, what? They're afraid to ask the question, and finally somebody gives up the courage and says, why wouldn't they get along? They're black. and my friend doesn't know how to answer the question delicately. I just look at them, and so he kind of like pauses to think, okay, how can I say this? And I just look at the guy straight in the face without missing a beat, and I just say, because Haitians work. And they jump from that table like I pulled the pin from a grenade. Like they're just like, oh shit, it's gonna go down. Like Mike's gonna get his face punched. And my friend just laughed because he's like,
yeah,
it's true. I'm just surprised you said it. Yeah, it's true.
Well, just like, okay, and I worked because I'm from New York too. It's amazing how Mike makes friends because I'm also from New York City. And I worked for a while in a real estate agency, the guy who hates marketing, go figure. But I worked in a real estate agency, right? The whole office is black, okay? All of it. Like literally not like one white person, and she was a Russian Jew, okay? But I was the only black American in that entire place, okay? Literally the only one. Even though everyone's skin color is same as mine or darker, but yet they're, and so it's funny because it's sitting right in the middle of a black American when and there was one day when I was in like my first couple of days working there, and I came out of the place. And it lets you know the differences here, right? So some lady, again, definitely American, so she was black. She comes up to me. She's like, oh, are you trying to work there? And it's like, oh, no, I do work there, actually. And she's just like, really? It's like, that's surprising. It's like, because she'd never been in there. So she just naturally assumed that the company was white owned, which it isn't. And so she just said, because they don't let black people work there. And I about lost my shit because I was just like... They don't let what? It's like, have you been in there at all? But that's the thing, is she just assumed it. She just assumed it's got to be. If there are people working kind of a white collar kind of job, well, they've got to be white. And it's like, no.
That's not what the white collar means, folks.
So where I live, it is mostly Hispanic. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, so in my experience, all of growing up, all of the blacks in our community were all professors. And they were better looking, more educated, like good at everything, like top-notch human beings. I grew up wanting to be black. Not kidding.
Well, if Rachel Dolezal taught us anything, is that it can be done. Dream. Just keep the dream, Elaine, okay?
But it's really funny to me because those same divisions that you're talking about, I mean, that would never have occurred to me because they were just kind of these, we're in the West. We don't have a lot of the same kinds of historical overhead, but they were just on these pedestals of people that were untouchably perfect in every way. I mean, just amazing people. And so I really grew up not understanding that. But the same divisions that are in the Black community were in the Latino community between, say, Puerto Rican Hispanics and Mexican Hispanics or whatever. I run into those at work all the time, and I'm like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, never ask my wife. Never ask my wife what she thinks of Peruvians.
Or like my dad, what he thinks of Nigerians. That's always used to say, you cannot trust Nigerians. They are liars and thieves. He used to say that all the time.
So you're telling me that letter I got in the mail about my bank account isn't actually true?
Was it a Nigerian prince? Because then
yes,
it was.
Yeah, his family had been kidnapped.
Fun fact, Nigeria is one of the most corrupt nations on the planet.
Really?
No.
It is actually.
You don't say.
Although also,
Elaine, I want to close because we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
So, what advice? We're talking about the death of civility, and the complaints are from both sides about
absolutely,
not being civil enough. So, what advice would you give? Closing advice would you give to kind of help repair that? Like, what can we on the right do without looking weak or without giving ground, right? Because like I said, I think the big issue here is the left says civility, and what they mean is shut the fuck up and do what we tell you to do.
Right.
So how can we fix that? How can we be more civil in our political discourse, or religious discourse, or any discourse, without compromising our values or beliefs? I'll let you have that last word, and then we'll close there.
I think there's one very simple way to do that, and that is to have a basic respect for humanity and realize that every human being is entitled to their point of view, and your job as a human being is to listen to that and understand that to the best of your ability through the eyes of the person you're listening to. I may disagree wholeheartedly on something, but I can often listen to someone long enough to figure out why they believe that based on on what has happened to them historically on a personal level. And as conservatives, we really need to know the liberal arguments on any topic even better than they understand them themselves. Because if we understand their arguments, we will also understand how to counter those effectively, so we're not just screaming at each other. I work with a guy who is very liberal, who actually begged me not to quit being a Republican because he says, I can talk to you. And I think that is essential. We've got to be able to talk to each other and understand each other. And that's going to take us understanding their arguments better than they understand ours, honestly. We have to be the ones to be able to say, yes, we understand that you are. So a good example for me, I am very much against illegal immigration, but I'm against illegal immigration because it exploits human beings. Okay. That is a liberal goal about not exploiting others and not hurting others. Okay. That's a liberal value, but it has a conservative solution. And that's the kind of thing I think we have to understand what those values are and be able to make conservative solutions relevant to people. So,
well, thank you very much, Elaine, for coming on the show and having this discussion with us. It was a lot of fun.
Putting up with us.
I love you guys. You're awesome. And thanks for
well, the feeling's mutual. The feeling is absolutely mutual. And guys, if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure you are following Elaine on Twitter at ELBH. That's Echo Lima Bravo Hotel. I do know the phonetic alphabet. She is one of my favorite followers. She's one of the nicest people. She's known me since before the beginning on Twitter. Make sure you're also following my co-host John at Kamui Hideyoko, who still hasn't fucking changed his tag like I've asked.
All right.
And then make sure you're following our channel account at ornery_opinions, where I will continue to be a bit of a snarky asshole. But after this conversation, I'm going to think back to this episode every time I'm an asshole. I'm going to feel just a little guilty. Then I'm going to do it anyway. I wish I could say that I've had my come to Jesus moment when it comes to being an asshole, Elaine. I'm not there yet, but I did have a lot of fun. So
sport is also important.
Yeah, I like the sport, and I'm good at it. So one of the few things I am good at. So make sure you follow us.
Honest.
I do try to be honest, and I'm a bit self-aware. So I will feel guilt now. Every time I'm an asshole, I will feel just a tinge of guilt.
I'll be sitting on your shoulder.
I will actually pause 2 seconds before hitting tweet and say, should I say that? Would Elaine approve of this? Probably not. Tweet.
They tweet it anyway, and then we go apologize.
Better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? So again, thanks for being on the show. We look forward to having you on again. And guys, make sure if you haven't hit subscribe on our channel, make sure to subscribe. Please share our videos with your friends and family on Twitter, anywhere you can. We would love to generate a bigger audience so we can have these kinds of conversations and kind of get people to start thinking about what they believe, why they believe, and how can they actually talk to people who don't think or believe the way they do. So We'll see you guys next week. Thanks again for coming on the show. You guys have a great week until then.
Bye-bye.